having the workshops initially was to bring both the violence against women and children's sectors together. We just completed conducting a scoping review of the intersections of violence against women and violence against children. And certainly what that review had shown us was that both the sectors were very much working in silos. And although there were very common areas around shared social norms and common drivers of both violence against women and violence against children, there were very little evidence of the sectors working together. And it was such an opportunity to start thinking about, so if this is what we found with the scoping review, the need to be focusing on joint programming, can we bring the two sectors into one room to start that discussion? So the first workshop was really just to showcase some of the evidence, to look at what are the opportunities for us to be working together as violence against women and children's sector, and knowing that not all programs would have to have a joint objective, but that an intersectional lens in one's work certainly will improve outcomes for both women and children. From our first workshop, it became very evident that a true understanding of what gender-transformative programming was lacking, that the word gender is not well understood and neither is it integrated, particularly in the children's sector. And yet it's such an important component if we're wanting to think about how you prevent violence. You've got to be thinking about how you integrate aspects of gender, whether you're working with children or adults, into your programming in order for you to have the really important work around transformative work around gender.
I think I'd like to encourage you to just focus on something you'll do differently in your work and how that picture represents that. So what is something new or different that you're adding or doing differently?
In the work that we do also, we need to try and find gaps in which, or spaces in which we can actually involve work around the upliftment of empowerment of women, but also involving men. Also working with communities and different stakeholders in order to make this vision a reality. And just working together with different organizations and ensuring that the work that we actually want to see happen does happen on the ground.
I would like also to have people with disabilities included so that they can have the knowledge that they can impart to their friends and whatever. Secondly, we want to work more with LGBTQI family. We are in our network, we do have them, but we also need to invite them more so that when we learn together, and so that the strategies that we are coming with from here they can utilize in their respective areas. And also we want to extend the working with children. For us, we are not directly working with children, especially small children, although we are seeing very young children in the Zela care centers that are being reported on daily basis. We are saying, okay, we will be looking at to strengthening our knowledge and also have programs if needs be that will be taken by the wing of public education.
Working with Sonke was really an opportunity, because when we had our first workshop, we invited Sonke as a participant, and it became very clear that Sonke has been doing a lot of thinking into this area for more than a decade around gender transformation. And they span both the violence against women and children sector. And I think it just aligned in terms of what our thinking was, in terms of what our hopes for our second session was, bringing Sonke in as a partner to co-host the workshop. And I think from my perspective, it worked really well, because the practice-based learning that Sonke could bring into the workshop complemented what we as the Children's Institute had uncovered through our research. And I think that just worked well for participants then to have that experiential learning experience.
I think it would be good to have a workshop where your staff can also investigate their own perspective, their own view of gender violence and traditional gender roles. Because if you go and work in a society with children and with families, from your own perspective, from your own framework, it can influence the way that you address the problem. And I would want it to be a healthy perspective in line with what the organization's vision is in terms of ending violence and impacting on it, that it go into a negative curve and become less harmful to the children and also their family, their mother especially.
Mosaic definitely does, gender sensitization, gender response, and gender transformation. In these three ways, I'm able to pinpoint our programs. Okay, so here we are doing light touch, we are sensitizing, but our transformative work must happen in this way. We call it transformative, but these are the gaps that were not there, and how are we going to tie it together? These are the things that we are doing well in terms of gender transformation, and these are where so that's also another big takeaway.
We've been able to, change the way we reach out to men, because usually, for example, a typical example would be, we would call on, we will mobilize men and bring them into a workshop. But then as time goes by, we will lose retention of them coming to the workshop. I think for us, moving our intervention and reaching out to places where they are, we've been able to target clinics. We've been able to target, taxi rank. Taxi rank is a very mobile industry. So, it would be very difficult, engaging those taxi drivers or that target market. So, us shifting the way we approached our mobilization, we've been able to reach where they are.
We have employed a limited few men as social workers, and normally you think, men is not gonna, this woman was just raped, how can a male social worker deal with her? But you are surprised if that's a professional person that really know his skill and he's empathetic and he helps the client to trust him and have the confidential environment. It is possible. So that broke some of the prejudice in our work environment, and I'm very proud of that, because I think it's necessary that, and what we have seen in our work is more voices also come in disclosing that they've been sodomized. And like in schools, one have a problem and then the others come and say, but it happened to me too, and so on. Where it was totally a taboo, you don't talk about it, we have seen a little bit of an increase in the reporting at Childline. So for us, that is also a gender issue that I think is starting to get a better response, because we break down the barriers that's been there.
We are operating in a very, limited resource environment. The funding is less. So whatever that we are able to, perhaps at that time, we are able to provide. So we would, offer social support for women, and, we would not intentionally, but we would somehow neglect children. So for me, what has been the takeout is learning from other organizations. What have they been doing? How are they, reaching out to children? We've been able to do that change. We are learning from different organizations through the workshop. We also want to reach out to schools. As the network, Imasipepe network, we are also engaging with schools where we making schools a safe place and a safe environment for young girls. It's been really fantastic, the work that we've been doing through supports that you guys have been doing, have been giving us as Children Institute. I think for me, we are now focusing on children more. Yes, we do help women in various ways, but we also don't want to neglect children as well, as they also, experience the domestic violence.
For me, the critical need in the sectors were to understand that having a life course approach to understanding violence prevention was critical and in many ways sometimes lacking. So you have your child protection sector, which we call violence against children sector, predominantly thinking about violence against children as a child protection issue, and violence against women sector thinking about violence in terms of gender-based violence and excluding boy children in their conceptualization of what needs to be done, and forgetting that actually when you think about violence across the life course, you start seeing how violence affects children early on and how that then impacts on later victimization and perpetration.
What I've experienced in our particular province is there's not a lot of insight across board with all the stakeholders in the gender violence and victim empowerment field that there is a linkage between women and children and violence. And I was so excited with this research, and I said, we are too busy, whatever. It wasn't received well. For me, that was a shock. So we have to bring the message to all the stakeholders. I think if we can have a bigger impact on government and on more role players to see the linkages and not to be so isolated. Childline, you work in child protection, stay out of victim empowerment. And I'm thinking, how can we not? Second highest call rate on our crisis line is sexual abuse. So we have to do something about it. This is what children is calling us about. And sexual abuse going to the gender thing, and if you go into the family, there's a parent's mother, there's always a history. The more you do your assessment and investigation. So I think there's a definite link. I think there's dots between, and the line can be drawn between them.
How are we going to build evidence from our practice, or how are we going to ensure that it's well documented, we're able to show it? And I think partnerships with other institutions. So another thing that, because we have limited funding, I realize that there are limitations to funding in South Africa that we don't have. And so we've boxed ourselves as institutions. So you are either an academic institution, or you are either a research institute, or you are either a service institute. So many of us who do service can't do evidence, or we feel we can't do evidence. And I think that session really opened my eyes that you can.
We talked about how research is expensive, and now we know how important research is in the work that we do. We are now able to do things in a very evidence-based way. We know now how we need to approach our interventions. We now have evidence. We are using that evidence to improve even in how we approach our interventions, whether it's through bringing different women, whether it's through engaging men. So I think for me, that was really a takeout in the workshop, incorporating research with the work as a practitioner. I think for me, that's very important.
What do you need to tweak in your implementation in order for you to start, documenting properly and making sure that your practice is informed by evidence? Yeah.
Now, we know through collaborating and with the different stakeholders. For example, in this case, we had eMosaic, which shared their research findings. So with the approach is very now easy. You are doing work with a lot of evidence. So the approach, I think for me, that was really a take out. Incorporating AE research with evidence.
Communication, people were able to relate easily how they feel and how they differ in opinions, and there was a lot of sharing of personal experiences that either supported or challenged the speaker's opinions, and it created a lot of dialogue, which was vibrant and learning environment that was very good for me.
I think the workshop exceeded my expectations. Everyone who attended were more than 100% invested. It left them with light bulb moments, thinking about how do they think about gender transformation, not just in their programming, but in their own organization. And I think that was more than what I would have hoped for.
And I really think that from our office, we would like to go forward and create a lot of dialogues discussing gender, gender norms. Just in society, we are in Mpumalanga, which is very rural, traditional. There's tribal chiefs, there is headmans, and I think we need to respectfully challenge a few of the norms and standards to create more equal opportunities or just viewpoints of the different genders. And in such a way protect our women and children.
I think we've started a process whereby we've established, and I see it as a community of practice, where I'm hoping that it won't just be a once yearly get together, but with it we can start thinking about how do we get together more frequently in different platforms to encourage organizations as a whole to engage in this and not just selected few.